Hello, and a very warm welcome to this session on geopolitics and global trade. What I can promise you is a different session than probably what you've seen on this stage many times today. This is zooming out. This is looking at the big world. This is looking at all the changes that are happening just now, which we believe will have a major impact on our industry. So my name is Ulrik Sanders. I'm a senior partner with BCG. I lead the shipping sector globally for BCG, and with me I brought a super expert on geopolitics, Aparna, who leads our center for Global Advantage Center that really does deep research in this, but Aparna will present this in more detail in a minute. So just for those of you who may not know BCG, we were founded in 1963 by a guy called Bruce Henderson. We are in 100 cities all around the world with 32,000 employees. And what we do is strategic advice to shipping companies. So these would be the likes of CMA, Maersk, Hapag, and the likes, where we try to look out in the future, predict what will happen. And of course, the things that are happening right now are massive. And we see that every single day. And we want to share some of the insights that we generated with you today. So a little bit more on what specifically we do. Obviously, BCG is a huge firm. We advise across all industries. But more specifically for shipping, we advise 55% of Lloyd's List in different strategic topics. We do partner with various bodies in the industry, like the Maersk Mc-Kinney Møller Center for Decarbonization. We have a collaboration with TIC. And also here in Singapore, we are proud to be partners of the GCMD for lower carbon fuel. But what we also do is quite a bit of research and thought leadership. You can go on our website, bcg.com, and you'll find some of the things that I mentioned here. But just a recent example, we've done deep research in everything that happens around the Red Sea and the impact. And also on the decarbonization front, we're really in the forefront of some of the intellectual research to that nature. What we also have, which is very pragmatic and which is probably relevant for ship owners and ship managers, is a very profound shipping benchmark that benchmarks operational costs on a ship-by-ship level across thousands of ships, which gives you a very accurate and up-to-date picture of how you fare on the operational cost, as well as the decarbonization footprint that your ship leaves. But let me stop here and hand it over to Aparna, who is a super expert within geopolitics.
Thank you, Ulrik, for that warm introduction. As Ulrik mentioned, I lead a practice within BCG called the Global Advantage Practice. This covers everything and anything connected to globalization. In the past, we used to talk about global growth. In the future and in the present, we talk about both global resilience and global growth. Now, within the practice, we have BCG's Center for Geopolitics. This is a team that has been around for about 7 years, and this team really looks at interpreting geopolitics in the context of business. I mean, most of us are following geopolitics quite closely, but we're looking at it either from the media lens or from the lens of economics. We would like to look at it from the lens of business leaders and what it means to business leaders such as players in the shipping industry. What we also do is we try to bring that insight to you in a rapid response. Because, you know, if you look at it from some distance, these things change every day and every week. So we try to bring a rapid response muscle to be able to help our clients understand this real time. So as Ulrik mentioned, this session is a little bit different from other sessions that you would see today. We want to zoom out and talk about broader geopolitical changes and how they are impacting business leaders. And then we will zoom in on what this means for the shipping industry in particular. So we'll take a more macro look at the shipping industry, in particular at global trade. Now, when people ask me to explain this to our clients, what I like to talk about is 10 forces. Now, there's very different ways to look at geopolitics, including history and economics. When we look at it from a business lens, we say there are 10 forces that business leaders should be aware of that impact business leaders. And we classify them in 4, 3, and 3. The 4 forces at the top are all about multipolarity. We are living in a world where a unipolar world was replaced by a bipolar world, is replaced now with a multipolar world. And the 4 forces at the top are the 4 poles that we are seeing. Now, multipolarity by itself does not cause volatility. What causes volatility is unbalanced multipolarity. And that is when the different powers on that top row are competing for dominance, are competing with each other. And here we have different poles acting differently. America is pivoting to an America First strategy. In Trump 2.0, America First is much more pronounced, much more prominent than Trump 1.0. And this is having repercussions all over the world. China has to pivot in this context, and China cannot rely on the US market or even the Western market the way it used to. So the Chinese companies and Chinese government is pivoting towards the global south and doing much more trade with the global south. I'll talk about that much later. In parallel, the global south is trying to find their own pathway here. What is the global south, first of all? These are 133 individual emerging and middle income markets that are trying to craft their own course through this. And these markets are basically trying to do business with each other, but they're also getting closer to China. They're doing more business with China. And the fourth pole is Europe. Europe has its own reckoning, essentially questions around European competitiveness. The Draghi report put this front and center to say what does the future of Europe look like and how can Europe be more competitive. And Europe is making its own pivot. They stopped buying Russian energy. They're buying more energy from the US. They are working now more with the Mercosur markets, with the Middle East, with emerging markets to try to find a path to competitiveness. So that's the multipolar world, and those are the four poles of the multipolar world. Now what happens because of that multipolarity is it creates economic battlegrounds and it creates global shocks. Economic battlegrounds can also be opportunities. Global shock require resilience. Now, economic battlegrounds are in three spaces: trade, technology, and economic nationalism. Trade is all about, well, we'll talk a lot more about trade, but entire trade lanes and top trade routes are being rewritten and pivoting to new trade routes. And we'll talk in detail about that. Tech is about the race for dominance in the technological future. The dominance between US, where that is where AI, that is where tech was ahead of the curve. But now we're also seeing competition from China, and it's a race for dominance. Now tech becomes geopolitically charged because most of the technology is dual use. That means you have defense use as well as civilian use. And that makes technology very important geopolitically. Economic nationalism is important from a public sector, but also private sector lens. Economic statecraft, which is the use of tariffs and sanctions, investment screening, was largely absent for 40 years of globalization. But it's coming back, and it's coming back with force. Not just from the US, but from all over the world, governments are intervening to make themselves more competitive and to reduce the competitiveness of multinational businesses in their local market. And businesses need to learn how to navigate it. Now, what about the shocks? Those are the last three forces. Three shocks: conflict, climate, and polarization. Conflict is all about wars. We see regional conflict increasing, and we see more and more of that. But this is not just in war. It's also battlefields around technology, battlefields around dominance of diplomacy, so on and so forth. And we don't think this is going to go away. Unbalanced multipolarity will make more of this happen. The second is on climate. Now, you're all in the shipping industry, which has made big bets on climate. And this is something that is massively in flux. On one hand, US's withdrawal from the Paris Agreement and general challenges to climate because of lack of challenges to competitiveness. Questions around climate and competitiveness are becoming more prominent. But at the same time, climate refuses to be ignored. Many nations of the global south have GDP that is vulnerable to climate. And therefore, this is something that you cannot ignore, even though there are pivots happening. And finally, populations are getting polarized. We had massive number of countries last year vote for their leaders, but many elections are still pending. Many democratic elected governments are also in flux and do not have, particularly in Europe, do not have a clear mandate from their populations. We think this polarization will enhance the conflict that we see in front of us. So those are the 10 forces. This is more of a broader overview. I will double click now on a few of them. I'll double click on America first, Europe, and trade, because I think those are the ones most relevant for the shipping industry. So what about America first? I think you just have to open the newspaper to get a new version of it every single day. But let me talk about the most important thing on this slide, which is in the middle. This is the philosophy. Every dollar we spend, every program we fund, every policy Does it make America safer, stronger, more prosperous? That's America first. What does it mean for the American economy? How does it help the American people? And that is the philosophy. Now, we studied Trump 1.0 to understand Trump 2.0, but one important difference is there is behind Trump 2.0 a very strong ideology, and the ideology is America first. In the first round, the ideology wasn't so strong. It was a transactional style. This time, the ideology is very strong, and this is important to note. Now, what are the prongs of America first? We see 6 prongs, 6 areas where America first is markedly different from the Biden administration, from the previous administrations. Not all of these are relevant for shipping. I'll talk a bit more about those that are. But first is trade policy. Any trade imbalance has to be corrected. And tariff is seen as a Swiss Army knife. There's a strong preference for tariff as the ultimate way to correct trade imbalances. And this manifests itself in a majority of the tariff decisions. What's interesting, though, is that the tariff announcements that have been made so far, some of these are going to actually happen, like the one with China. Some of these are going to be used for negotiation leverage, and some of these are being used for diplomatic leverage, for diplomacy as well. For example, the announcement today that anyone who buys oil from Venezuela will get a tariff that has not to do with trade. It has to do with diplomacy. So it's a Swiss Army knife. It's being used for all kinds of things. The next one is industrial reshoring. Simply speaking, more jobs in the US, fewer jobs to be allowed out of the US. This means encouraging companies to locate in US and create jobs in the US, but also punitive measures on companies seeking to take jobs out of the US. And this is being seen in both directions. The third is expansionary fiscal policy. This means supporting corporate tax cuts. This is a major Republican policy, and this is legislative in nature. This is also good for business. The problem, though, is that the policies on the left, particularly tariffs, are being done through executive order. So they are rolling out first. The tax cuts are through legislative process. Those will take time. And that's why we're seeing the shock to the market. We're seeing shock to businesses because the expansionary policies will take time. The tariffs are happening already. And that's the shock that businesses are facing. That's what the stock market is seeing. The next 3 are about climate. Of course, stepping out of the Paris Agreement gets a lot of limelight. But what's interesting is deregulation and removing climate regulation. The philosophy being climate regulation was slowing down business, slowing down innovation and competitiveness. Dismantling climate regulation is going to help American businesses be more competitive. That's the philosophy. And then, of course, immigration. A lot of executive orders around immigration were seen within the first week. What was interesting is that in the second Trump presidency, we saw over 40 individual executive orders. In the first presidency, we saw 1 in the first month. This is a much more confident presidency with a clear agenda that's moving much faster than anyone expected. And of course, on foreign policy, you see that in the newspaper. I won't belabor it, but I can take questions on it later. Now, what does it mean for the rest of the world? And what does it mean for Europe? Well, Europe is in its own dilemma. And I think nowhere was it explained as clearly as the Draghi report. The Draghi report said Europe's competitiveness is in challenge. If you want to be more competitive, you need to find a way to balance value-based trade, balance climate with competitiveness. You need to find a solution for energy where the cost of energy does not threaten your competitiveness. You need to spend in order to be competitive. And the Draghi report has now been adopted by the EU Commission as the default strategy. And I think Europe will have to make their own choices to balance competitiveness and values, balance competitiveness and climate. And that's what we need to see unfolding. What does it mean for trade? And this is the one we'll spend the most amount of time talking. Now, what's interesting about trade is that trade is a domino effect. Tariff is a domino effect. Now, one thing that when I talk to shippers and maritime sector players, they say, oh, you know, we've seen tariffs before, we've survived it, and global trade has found a way around tariffs. The truth is we've not seen such holistic tariffs in the past. That's one. And second, we have not seen such holistic tit-for-tat tariffs, which means every market that Trump tariffs came to reacted with their own tariffs. Europe has reacted, Canada has reacted, Mexico held back but will be reacting, so on and so forth. And so that domino effect creates a spiral that will impact global trade. Just to put it in context, the net impact of tariffs, which was mostly directed to China in the first Trump presidency, was a total of just under $400 billion of trade impacted. This time, it's already $1.4 trillion. And if the reciprocal tariffs happen, $3.2 trillion worth of trade. This is an order of magnitude larger impact than what we have seen in the past, which is why we should be paying more attention to it. What would that look like? Let's double click on that, because many of you look at global trade and many of you see growth through global trade. What we did at BCG and the Center for Geopolitics is we built a global trade model. This is a 10-year forecast. So it takes into account tariffs, etc., but it's a much longer picture. So it looks at adjustments, replacements, and longer-term trends as well. This trade model has been done through an AI-driven analysis, which has individual products and individual shipping locations. So it has 500 million data points. It's very, very detailed. What we are showing you is a zoom-up version of it at the global level, but we have regional versions, we have sectoral versions, so on and so forth. The first thing is global trade will continue to grow at slower pace than the past, but it will grow just under 3%. After tariffs, though, this growth may slow down even further, and we'll show you the impact of that later on. The trade lanes will shift, and many of these shifts will get accelerated by the tariffs. The most important one is the US-China, that big red one. So how you read this map is the red lines are the ones where global trade is going to decline over the next 10 years. The green ones are where they're going to grow and grow faster than global trade. That means grow faster than 3%. The yellow ones, they will grow, but slower than 3%. But yellow ones can be pretty important too, because some of them are core trade routes, just growing slower. So what do you read out of it? The first one is the US. US is pivoting away from China, will continue to pivot away from China. This has been happening for the last 8 years. But how they're able to make it work is through stronghold North America. That is nearshoring and friendshoring. That means trading more with Mexico, trading more with Canada, trading more with Europe. Those are the 3 yellow and green lines that you see. If that breaks because of tariffs, there's a vulnerability to stronghold North America. In our model, global trade between US to the world will grow 2.5%. But this can slow down massively with the tariffs, and I'll show you by how much. The next one is EU. The trade between EU and Russia, you see the red line, has collapsed. So EU can't trade energy with Russia because of sanctions. That has moved to US. So you see the green line, EU to US, that's largely energy imports between EU from the US. But EU now has to create new trade lanes because that is at risk. So they need to trade more with Africa, with Mercosur, with emerging markets. Recently, EU signed their agreement with Mercosur, which was being discussed for 20 years, finally got signed because EU realizes they need to make this pivot. The other set of pivots are on China, and I'll talk about them in the next page. What are those? So 6 themes that come out of it. Stronghold North America, that is, in order to decouple from China, US has to trade more with friends. Those friends are US, is Mexico, Canada, EU. With the tariffs, stronghold North America is at risk. And that's the biggest risk because of tariffs. In terms of the other 4 themes, China pivot, what is China doing? China has to pivot away from the West. Trade between China to the West is declining. This is not just for US, it's also with EU, with tariffs on automotive, etc., etc. So China needs to find new growth, and the new growths are with the global South. So trade between China and the global South is set to grow nearly 6%, twice as fast as global trade. And that's the new trade route that's being written. Already today, many global South countries trade much more with China than they do with EU or with the US. And this substitution has been happening for a long time. It's something that is part of the repercussions of the America First policy. This is going to accelerate because of tariffs. It would get even faster. Global South. Countries of the Global South, particularly emerging markets, are going to trade more with China, but also more with each other. Because many countries of the Global South are what we call connector economies. Connector economies are those that step in to connect between US and China, connect between the West and China. And so these connector economies, ASEAN, India, Mexico, these connector economies will have to trade more with each other The trade between global south countries will grow almost 4% and with China. And so that's the other opportunity. ASEAN and India both will have to become substitutes for the trade with China. And so ASEAN and India stand to benefit. Now, the big risk here is reciprocal tariffs, which we still need to see. But I personally feel that some trade lane has to be left open for US to remain competitive. And I think that trade lane will be a trade deal with India, a trade deal with ASEAN. Because you can't make enemies of everyone and stay competitive. So you'll have to find an avenue to work more with ASEAN and India. Europe is a question mark. There are pros and cons. If Europe successfully pivots, it could be competitive, but I think European competitiveness is a big question here. So many of these trends are going to get accelerated by the tariffs. The only one that will get reversed by the tariffs is stronghold North America. So speaking of tariffs, this has been a multi-episode soap opera with many, many episodes. Let me talk to you about the episodes first, right? First, Mexico, China, Canada tariffs. Over $1.4 trillion of imports impacted. Already 20% on China, 10 plus 10. 25% on Canada and Mexico, with the exception of potash and energy. The next one, steel and aluminum, impacts quite a few countries. The third one, the big one, is reciprocal tariffs. That means whatever tariff others charge us, we charge them. But it's a bit more complicated than that, and I'll explain. And finally, up in the air is digital services, tariffs on digital services, which impacts Europe and several other markets. The first point that I will make is, if you think, hey, my supply chain is immune because this is about Mexico, this is about Canada, I'm not there, I don't care. I hear that a lot in Asia. Let me show you this chart. These are the top 10 trading partners of US. If you look at the 4 or 5 tariffs that I showed you, some or the other is going to impact someone or the other. Mexico, mainland China, and Canada will be impacted with the first round of tariffs. Europe is going to get their own share of tariffs, automotive, steel, but also European tariffs are going to be announced soon. The steel and aluminum tariffs are going to impact South Korea, one of the top 4 exporters of steel and aluminum to the US. It's going to impact India. The reciprocal tariffs are going to impact Vietnam. It's going to impact India. It's going to impact several of the other markets here. So if you think you're immune, there will be some tariff that is going to have some impact if you're one of the top trading partners to the US. So this is very holistic, and that's an important takeaway. One more point I'll make before I move away from here. Often clients say to me, you know what, it's Trump for 4 years, America first for 4 years, we'll wait it out. And when we wait it out, it'll be all good. I will remind you that tariffs are sticky. It's extremely unpopular for any president to remove tariffs. Local businesses lobby to keep them once they are... In fact, Biden kept most of the Trump 1.0 tariffs. In fact, added more to them. So tariffs tend to be sticky. They don't go away very easily. It takes several years or multiple trade deals to dismantle tariffs. Now, a moment on reciprocal tariffs, because this is the one with the most pervasive impact. The way the reciprocal tariffs are going to be measured is actually a very complicated equation. The first factor is, what is the tariff on us? So I can reciprocate. But it's not just the tariff on US, it's also VAT. Because VAT is seen as a protectionist tax, and if there's high VAT, that can subject you to tariff too. The third one is currency manipulation. If a country is being seen as manipulating and bringing down their currency exchange rate to be more competitive to export to the US, you can get a tariff. The next one is harmful trade measures. If you are having subjective, qualitative, harmful trade measures, that can also subject you to tariff. So there are many, many things here, and it's going to be a very complicated thing to roll out. It can take anywhere from 6 to 8 months to happen, and that's what we need to see. The announcements are coming April 2nd, I believe, after which we'll see how they roll out. I feel many of these will turn into trade deals, because countries are already thinking, if I'm going to get reciprocal tariff, we work with ASEAN, India, many other countries around the world. Many of them are already thinking, what can I offer to avoid being part of the reciprocal tariffs? So I think a lot of negotiations may happen before this completely settles. Now, what does this mean for global trade? And here we modeled it for US in particular. The impact could be quite substantial. Now, we had different scenarios here. We have one scenario, which is the gray bar, which is the no tariff scenario. That's the November-December scenario. The green scenario is based on limited tariffs. That means if tariffs are on specific products and specific countries, it will have some impact on trade from US to the world, but it won't be disruptive. So US growth in trade will go from 2.4 to 2.2. The big one is what we call 20-25-25. That's the full 20% on China, 25% on EU, 25% on Mexico, Canada. That's the one that can slow trade between US to the world as much as from 2.4% growth to 1% growth. This is the most disruptive one, which is why I feel some of these may become trade deals and some of these may get negotiated because it's a pretty big hit on US competitiveness. What was interesting is that President Trump did not rule out short-term pain. And so there is certain readiness in the current administration to put up with this short-term pain for long-term competitiveness. A quick word on China since we are here in Asia. So say, what about China? And this is the one that's been happening for the last 8 years. For 8 years, China is realizing that we have to decouple from the US and need to trade more with the rest of the world. So China is actually trading much more with ASEAN. China to ASEAN trade is set to grow almost 6%. China's trading more with multiple emerging markets around the world, Africa, Latin America. These are several new shipping lanes that are getting created and shipping lanes that are going to grow. Something interesting here is that China-India trade is also set to grow. Because what we find is for India to be a major manufacturing economy for the world, India has to trade more with China. That's because China is still 35% of global manufacturing. You have to make nice with China to trade with the world. And that's something that we are already seeing diplomatically happening. Don't know how sustainable it is. It's a tough relationship between these two large economies in Asia, but that's something that is required for trade to grow. So what does this mean? Before I hand over to Ulrik to talk about bringing it home to shipping, I just put it from a geopolitics lens on what is relevant for people in this room, essentially. First of all, plan for disruption. One thing we did not talk about was the 301, which is disruption and port taxes on ships built in China. We can talk about that in Q&A if you want, but there will be significant shipping disruption. The one thing that is happening in the short term is that people are freezing. We've heard countless stories about the volatility this has caused. You know, I place a order from China that is meant to come to the US. Suddenly, because of tariff, the price increases. I don't have the budget. The shipment is stuck, right? Or, a particular shipment is needed. The margin is very small. It's an agricultural product. I don't know if the reciprocal tariffs will hit me by the time the ship arrives in the US. The shipment is stuck. So expect disruptions because this is happening so fast and so disruptively, you need to plan for that and you need to prepare for that. Second, developing a geopolitical radar. Mostly our clients react to it, saying, oh, this announcement has come, what shall I do? A geopolitical radar means anticipating, setting up scenarios, modeling those scenarios, and thinking about what you would do, plan A, plan B, plan C. Many procurement teams of our clients are doing it. You serve those procurement teams. Think about how you can develop that radar yourself. Finally, learning to navigate tariffs as well as the broader economic statecraft. Businesses could get away without understanding much of this in the past. I don't think that's an option in the future. So learning how to understand the legal language, the policy language, the regulatory language will be important. And we call that a geopolitical muscle. Develop the muscle to be able to navigate, to be able to survive, sometimes even thrive in this. I also talked about new shipping lanes and new opportunities. With a geopolitical muscle, you can address those opportunities. Finally, think of partnering with your customers, jointly working with them to solve this together. Because many of your customers are actually suffering from this. Many of your customers are looking for opportunities through this. Working closely with them and being a thought partner as shipping players, as maritime players will help you. So these are just some thoughts from a geopolitical standpoint. Let me hand back to Ulrik from a shipping standpoint, some more thoughts.
Thank you, Aparna, for sharing the profound research that you're doing in the Center for Geopolitics. It is really a changing world, right? And many would look at this and say it's a threat, but we also believe there's a lot of opportunities in there. Especially for the maritime industry, the key is adaptability. And I'll share some of the things that we believe that could happen. So first of all, as Aparna talked about, there's going to be a massive change of trade routes. Those trade routes will change pretty fast, especially if the 301 comes into effect. Briefly, an explanation of the 301, of course, that's the levy on ships that hit the Chinese ships that hit US borders. They will be penalized with up to $1 or $1.5 million and perhaps even more. These are shocks that immediately has an impact. Now, on container flows with big ships, they can probably absorb better than if you're a bulk carrier or you are also in the wet side. So it's going to be hit different. But what it also means is that trade routes will change. There will be new avenues into US, Canada, Mexico, other ways of getting it. Because what we also clearly showed you before is that global trade will grow. So we're not really looking at a scenario where global trade is going to go south. We're looking at a changing world, but a global trade that will grow. And that brings me to point number 2, the mix between commodities. For sure, there will simply be commodities that can no longer be transported, for instance, into the US. It's simply too expensive to do. So there will be other ways of doing that. There will be other trade routes opening up. But for sure, what we see is more commodity imports and perhaps less finished goods because it's simply going to be penalized too much. The third thing is that this will create an avalanche of administrative burdens on everybody connected to this. Now, for the shipping industry, that also needs that somebody needs help to do that. So I think there's going to be a good opportunity for many shipping companies or associated companies to build services that basically help people with import-export and to navigate through all of this. Then we will see, for instance, the trade policy changing. So even on the commodity level, for instance, the grain exports from US out is going to be very, very impacted. Again, has a massive impact of all the ships that basically trade around the world today. We'll see probably enforced national borders, security measures, paperwork. Again, good opportunities for helping that. And then looking at the US, we believe there will be actually labor shortage with all the immigration policies that are changing fast. But stuff needs to be produced. So where do you then actually produce it? So a lot of things that really will impact a lot. And I think with the numbers we saw, and we've been running those trade models for many, many years, the changes that we're now predicting in those trade models have just multiplied by a factor a lot. And that's what we all need to deal with in the shipping industry. So again, there's going to be tailwinds and there's going to be headwinds. The insight that you need to create is to be able to predict what's going to change and when it's going to change and how can I turn that into a competitive advantage or at least navigate in a good way. So I'll just end it here and open up for questions. And also, if you follow bcg.com, these trade models is something that we constantly update. So as changes happen, you can use that as a source, at least for some kind of competitive intelligence for sure.